you all so much for joining us today. We are going to be talking about the silent security threats that IT leaders are missing. A lot of our talk is going to be around shadow SaaS and Gen AI apps. My name is Melanie Thomas. I am the VP of Cybersecurity here at Bridgepointe Technologies. Helping us moderate those chat, any questions you have as we go through, Eric Leong, who is our Senior Solutions Architect, also here specializing in cybersecurity at Bridgepointe. With us today, our panel of experts. I've loved working with these guys. We have Daniel Akeridge from Summit 7. So Daniel Akeridge is the director of sales and engagement at Summit 7. So he has an extensive experience in cybersecurity and compliance. He specializes in helping defense contractors achieve DFARS 7012, CMMC, and ITAR compliance, leveraging Microsoft Government Cloud. Summit 7 offers CMMC solutions, managed services, and licensing for the defense industrial base and higher education institutions. They're experts in CMMC, CUI, ITAR, NIST 800-171, and DFARS. So lots of acronyms. Very, very excited to have you here, Daniel. Boaz, we have Boaz Barzell. Thank you. He is the field CTO at Ox Security, specializing in aligning product innovation and the real world needs of customers. So Ox Security's mission is to help AppSec and DevOps teams focus on vulnerabilities that matter. Their platform is an ASPM, so lots of acronyms today, that is AppSec Posture Management, and they help to consolidate disparate application security tools into a single console and enhancing AppSec and ensuring regulatory compliance. So very excited to have you here as well.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. Idan Fast. So Idan is the CTO and co-founder of Grip, contributing his fascinating experience in embedded security software research and development. So Grip Security is a pioneer in SaaS identity risk management, where their solutions leverage identity as the key control point, empowering enterprises to embrace SaaS adoption securely. So thank you so much, Idan, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Melanie.
Thank you. All right. And the fourth panelist here, Mac. Mac has been in the backup and recovery space longer than Azure has existed. So Mac is with 1111 Systems, offering end-to-end managed recovery solutions focused on customized, holistic recovery programs that provide comprehensive application level recovery. So a lot of that very good resilience conversation that we luckily have toward the beginning of every year. We want to make sure continues throughout the year.
And you said my last name right. In good shape. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go through a quick high level of the roadmap, right? The discussions that we're going to be going through throughout the session today. So we're starting first with strategy and consequences. So the very real reasons, the why of technology decisions going into all these different avenues that we have, right? So a lot of things that we're going to balance as we're making technology decisions, as we're implementing, and the very real consequences that come with not doing that correctly outside of a breach, right? It's not just our data that's at risk there. We're going to move then into secure code and CI/CD pipeline and why it's important to focus on the source of vulnerabilities, the source of where our code is, especially if you are a company who has customers that use your product that's software related, right? So we're all customers of somebody, and those of us who have customers down the line, even more important, right, that we're locking things down on our side as well. We're going to move in then into shadow SaaS and Gen AI discovery. It's always very spy feeling, or it's always there's shadow things going on. There are risks, right? Our users are growing more and more tech savvy, and they can find reasons and ways and means to get around some of the boundaries that we try to put up to protect our data and protect our systems. So we'll talk a bit more about shadow SaaS and discovering, right, where our users might have SaaS accounts and generative AI that could put some of our data at risk. We'll then move in and wrap up with validated backup and resiliency, and the very big why also of companies not talking about this. So why aren't companies talking more about backing up our SaaS data, backing up our application data? So in that, hopefully never happens, but will, right, event, that's something bad, we get compromised, we have a natural event that takes out our systems, that we have as little downtime as possible, and that a bad event might take us down, but not out. So a lot of topics to cover today. So very excited to go with you all through this. To approach a couple of questions just right off the bat as we get rolling. Yes, we're definitely recording this session. We have Eric, again, mentioned in the chat, helping out with any questions, and then we'll take some QA at the end. All right, so we're starting with Daniel in Summit 7. So I wanted to start with the end in mind. So those consequences again. So why we have to care, right, about the strategies, about architecture, about tool sets, and what we really need to put in place to protect our organizations. So regulations, of course, are a big part of this. The penalties, the reputation damage that not meeting those can be. We also have, the balance between that and requirements for customer contractual obligations. When we think about, well, in order to be safe, our customers are starting to learn that they need to ask that vendors are compliant, that we have SOC 2 Type 2 protecting their data and systems. And then, of course, ideally, on top of all of that, we're also looking at framing our decisions and our mindsets around a framework that helps us move from end to end and try to meet these in a structured way. So from the perspective of very highly regulated spaces, right? People that are tapping into and controlling critical infrastructure, research, especially when we're looking at higher education spaces. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in mindsets, approaches, concerns, and are we looking at any gaps there?
That's a really good question. So back in 2017, I'm going to rewind the clock just a little bit. The DoD enforced some cyber regulations on defense contractors, right? Because they deal with some very sensitive information, right? Some of them being higher ed with regulated research, some of them being machine shops, some of them being developers, kind of runs the gamut, right? About 300,000 or so companies were impacted by this cyber regulation. Well, during that time, because it wasn't validated that they actually implemented the cyber requirements, nobody actually did it. And, it's kind of a bummer, people are pro or anti-regulation. I definitely understand. But in being in the space that we're in with all the clients that we support, I have conversations daily with people that are coming to us and saying, Daniel, I either A, need to get ahead of this because now there's a certification requirement that's launching this summer that the DoD is requiring, or B, something terrible just happened to us and we had our data exfiltrated. And so the people that I talk to are kind of in two camps. Until they're being forced to do it, they actually haven't been doing it, which has led to several pretty significant breaches. So, for example, China has an exact replica of our F-35 fighter jet. That seems a little problematic. One of the newer articles that happened a few years ago was China hacked a naval defense contractor and stole 600 gigabytes of undersea warfare technology called the Sea Dragon program. And so when you start looking at this, what's very interesting about it is they're not just attacking the top big primes, right? When you think defense contractors, you probably think Lockheed Martin and Boeing and these kinds of people. They're actually attacking the most vulnerable piece, and that's their supply chain, because they're flowing this data down to their suppliers. And some of them are very small manufacturing shops. We're talking 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people. And people come to us all the time. They're like, Daniel, don't worry. I got this cybersecurity thing on lock. I went, and this is a true story, by the way. I went and locked my server in the attic. I put it behind a locked door. I am good to go. No one's going to get me. Right. And, I have my email hosted in GoDaddy and I have multi-factor turned on. And they think that those kind of three checkboxes are enough to make sure that they're not going to be a target for this kind of thing. However, China, North Korea, Russia are all very active and have a lot of capability to bypass many of those things, as you can imagine, right? So when we're talking about stories like this, there's an active and real threat that is touching hundreds of thousands of companies in the DoD space, as well as the federal government as a whole, right? Any kind of sensitive information that might actually happen or might actually be disclosed. So that's kind of an interesting initial take is, we actually are going to have regulation enforcing the requirement onto people, because when you let people write their own report card, they just put A's all the way down. And when in reality, they are very, very far from it.
Oh, absolutely. And especially I think when I was looking at the article for the China hack sensitive Navy undersea warfare, it was specifically those contractors. And sometimes we think, oh, the government, right? The government has tons of money. Of course, they have all the best shiny things in place, but it's all the other people that also have access to those systems that can also be a target. And speaking of target, right, target breach, I think was also that example where it was a contractor and you do the best you can as an organization, but knowing who has access to your systems and what their protections are and their policies and whatnot, of course, completely, links into your vulnerability as an organization.
Absolutely. Which kind of led to that second one, right? The Disney worker
Right.
story, which is a fun story because this is somebody very well intentioned, right? Was trying to do their job, wasn't trying to be actively malicious, wasn't trying to be an insider threat of any stretch. And they downloaded an AI tool and they were using it. And all of a sudden they get a message from a Discord channel saying, hey, FYI, I've got access to all of your things. Here's some screenshots of messages you've been sending back and forth, which is like, oh my gosh. Like I think Disney reported somewhere around a terabyte of data stolen. And so
It's
you have somebody
terrifying.
in a position that is just trying to do their job. I tell people all the time, it's not that I don't trust users. It's just that users will always take the path of least resistance, right? If there's the ability to
Absolutely.
do their job faster, quicker, more efficient, and get you the information you need as their manager or their boss, guess what? They're probably going to take it. And it's our responsibility to put measures in place to try and mitigate that, right? A, provide the tools they actually need to do their job, but B, provide enough detection and monitoring and response to make sure incidents like this don't happen, or if at least if they do, they're very minimized, right, in scope. And so
Absolutely.
there are several tools out there. DNS filtering, highly recommended, right? Stand up your own
Mhm.
large language model, your own kind of AI private instance in a private cloud, endpoint detection and response, network taps, right? Analyzing network traffic and seeing where traffic's actually going. And so when you're looking at these things, you really need to make sure you're paying attention to provide the tools they need, educate them, and then monitor them to make sure that there's no accidental bypassing of the policies and procedures that they've signed off on.
Absolutely. I think that when we were thinking about this as an idea, right? Because it's relatively recent, happened here in the last several weeks,
Mhm.
that there is a very fun and frustrating balance that happens when more and more people are adopting AI, right? So
Yeah.
on one hand, users, researchers, any of us, right? Yeah, of course we want to work faster. Of course we want to be more creative. Of course we want to do these things at greater scale. And so AI, right? AI is supposed to be
Mhm.
used for that. If we can't afford our own smaller large language models, our own kind of programming on top of that, we're going to use, right? We have people all the time using, Chat GPT and whatnot, all the open AI fun things. And so, of course, why wouldn't we want innovation? Why don't you want me to work faster? And then from the organization's perspective, it's like, well, it's our data, right? So not understanding what you're putting your data at risk. And then the organizations, of course, needing to make sure that they have acceptable use policies. They have some kind of barrier control, right? To control where is it, how is it using, where is my data going out, why,
Mhm.
right? That can be very frustrating. So I have very strong feelings about AI personally. And so it's always a conversation that comes up is, speed versus safety, perhaps is a good way to always say AI for.
Absolutely. Because Samsung, I think it was a little over a year ago, their employees were uploading things into OpenAI and ChatGPT model, and proprietary Samsung information was now publicly available. It was now sourced to
Mhm.
the world. And so you got to be really careful because it only takes a few keystrokes now to cause significant corporate damage that's very hard to come back from.
Absolutely, especially from some of these big names like Disney. One small
Oh,
thing could do huge damage, even though maybe in the grand scheme of things it's not that bad. It can be significant. So I think one that comes to mind for me as well was LastPass. LastPass is a
mhm.
password management tool. They were in the news as a breach when really I think it was just their training data or just like a test
Yep,
database that wasn't even real. But because of that, it lost significant confidence in the consumer bases. So
absolutely. You got to be careful.
got to be careful. All the scary things. We also want to think about future considerations. So, in this regulation space, yes, we have to lock everything down. Yes, that can mean various things for various organizations. But you had an example of one for some future thinking for Farsi UI.
Yeah, so the federal government is starting to realize that people haven't been doing either a good job or a job at all in protecting sensitive data that they get from federal agencies. And so the DoD was the first one to pick up on this. And they said, hey, that thing that we told you to do back in 2017, we've figured out that you haven't been doing it. So we're going to require you to be certified in this cybersecurity regulation. That's specifically called CMMC. And we're going to make it a requirement of contract award that you can produce this certificate, or else you don't get any more defense dollars, which is a, by the way, carrot and stick situation. This stick is working very well with a little bit of carrot. And so now the federal government as a large entity and all the agencies that represent that have said, you know what, DoD, I think you're onto something. And so they've launched a new regulation. It's in a proposed state right now called the FAR CUI clause. Now, CUI, for those that might not know, is called controlled unclassified information. It's what the federal government deems as sensitive information that they're going to give you or you're going to create on behalf of a contract. And so now the FAR CUI clause that's in the proposed state, likely to go live sometime probably towards the end of next year, is going to require that you implement NIST 800-171 controls, that you have incident response within 8 hours of an incident being known. Each agency gets to decide if you have to be certified or not. You have to use specific FedRAMP authorized clouds. And so when you're starting to go through this and starting to kind of build and understand your business around it, if you do any DoD work, you're in jeopardy of not having business in the next, 12, 24 months, depending on when your contract cycle is. And if you're doing work for the federal government, you could see this requirement as early as a year and a half, 2 years from now in solicitations and requirement of contract award. And so the federal government as a whole is getting very, very serious about this. The DoD is just the canary in the coal mine requiring something like this. But just be very aware that if you plan to pursue any federal dollars over the next 3 years in total, is very likely going to be an enforceable cybersecurity requirement on that solicitation and a requirement of contract award.
Excellent. And those systems are not necessarily, turned up in 1 or 2 days, right? These are things that you need to think about strategy-wise, or things that you need to start planning for now, so you're ready to not lose contracts. You're ready for those regulations to come out. Things that could impact your applications, your user base, right? As much strategy as far ahead of time preferred, right? Could save you some dollars there too in the implementation.
Absolutely. It typically takes around 12 months for an organization to kind of turn the ship to these cyber requirements, right? They use a framework called NIST 800-171, which is 110 unique things that you have to implement. And when you're, there's kind of two sides of it, right? If you're a small business, you likely don't have funds, but you have the agility to move quick. That's great for you. You have large enterprises that we support as well that have a lot of money, but to turn a ship that's 5,000 people, it's a little bit more difficult, right? And so having that kind of heads up and knowing that it could take your business 1, 2 plus years, especially if you have to migrate off of non-compliant ERP systems or collaboration platforms or things like that, it's really important to start those discussions now and especially build a budget and a project plan on how you're going to get there, and to give your sales and BD team who's pursuing these new contracts heads up on when they can actually start pursuing them so that you're actually going to be compliant to win them.
Fantastic. Awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much for all of that amazing information. So we'll have a QR code with Daniel's LinkedIn information toward the end of the presentation as well. Daniel, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So let's go into another perspective of thinking toward the start, right? Is we're still thinking ahead on strategy. How are we tackling some of these things that we haven't tackled just yet? Let's talk about solid foundation. So looking at securing our code and securing our code pipelines, or the CI/CD pipeline. So Boaz, welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So we have some fun numbers up on the screen here. So a number that lives in my head, that has not left my head since I saw it earlier this year, was over 40,000. So over 40,000 CVEs were registered in 2024. It's a 30% increase from those registered in 2023. And so just like all the other trends, right, we're seeing vulnerabilities go up, we're seeing attacks go up. Nothing's really going down, right? So vulnerability is, right, being a large part of what any organization is tackling, because everyone has different systems in their place. I mentioned earlier, everyone's a customer of someone else. And when we're the one developing it, we really better lock some things down, right? So to look at that from kind of the left side of the attack, right? So bugs are inevitable. We know that we have vulnerabilities. So not to alienate, right, the very significant necessity of DevSecOps or development security operations throughout organizations. Why do we think that maybe organizations still aren't maybe trending in that vulnerability direction where we're looking at how can we have no vulnerabilities as little as possible, and kind of how that connects with the code in our AppSec in general?
So that's a fantastic question because it brings really the industry from when it was 10 years ago, when we had less than 100,000 or even 50,000 vulnerabilities, to today when we have 240,000 vulnerabilities. So just the sheer number is amazing. And there's actually a paradox right now in the AppSec space, what I call the AppSec progress paradox, where in recent years, we were focusing on detecting more. We want to see more vulnerabilities, new issues. We want to ensure that there are no holes that attackers can attack us. What happened is now we're detecting too much. There is, on average, about 500,000 vulnerabilities in an organization when you're looking at the code. So right now, that number actually increases. We're expecting a 25% increase for 2025. So this is really, really amazing. And I feel that we've come into a place where once we've started scanning and we're starting looking and shifting left, in this case, we're starting to see more and more issues. And now the problem is to understand, okay, what are the issues that are critical for me? What's important for me? As you said correctly, we have different environments. Every company now develops software and they're doing it differently. I'm working with customers, edge customer, sometimes they're using the same tools, but their whole workflows and processes and languages they're using are completely different and they have completely different problems. So we're seeing that kind of increase right now. And I'm also thinking about, the age that AI starts. And a lot of our developers and DevOps are using those AI tools, so they write more code. And inherently, they have more vulnerabilities from that code because I would compare it to Stack Overflow on steroids, where the data that's fed to the AI is Stack Overflow. I love Stack Overflow, but the quality of the code from a security perspective, not that amazing. And even if you're telling AI agents today, the generic one, usually to write secure code, they will secure something and then they'll leave something else unsecured. And then you say, okay, what are more of the security issues? And they'll fix the one, but they're going to change the other one. So you constantly get yourself in a running after vulnerabilities. And this is something that I've seen a lot of companies are fighting against, and it's very hard for them to understand what is critical for me because of the sheer volume of information. And we have humans who are trying to triage everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is always scary, right? We're like, wait a second, the threat's on the inside, right? It's not a malicious insider, like it's our own code base. Just like anything else, right? We need to make sure that we're locking those things down. I think we've also had some interesting conversations with customers lately where, they're saying, can we even make sure that, is there a way to scan for code that's Gen AI code, right? That, like you mentioned, it's copy paste. It's sure in general, right? This could be a secure way to call that library, call that whatever, right? But in our environment, that's not necessarily going to work, right? So I think we see this in the academic space as well, as students are learning GitHub and learning how to find that kind of information and reuse it. Yeah, make sure that you're reusing the right kind of data, right?
Yeah.
And all of that comes at a cost, of course. And we're not here to talk dollars today necessarily, but that also kind of helps us think about the total cost of ownership across the various systems, right, that we all use. So responsibilities for not just the organization, like I mentioned earlier, who produces the product, but also as a consumer, how we scan those. And there's this joint responsibility, right? There's a responsibility for me as an organization to protect my vendors and protect and scan for their information. So lots of different fronts as we even know what's in our environment in general, and then locking all of those things down. So a lot of things to juggle. So what are you all seeing? Are there any trends that you all are seeing as far as kind of leading the concerns or larger demands to address some of those? So no one
That's a
wants to end
great
up on the list,
question.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question because I think that we're seeing the same thing that happened in the IT industry from, the invention of firewall, antivirus, IDS, IPS, and bot protection, and kind of the advancement when it then got to, I have multiple tools, so I'm gonna buy a tool that will consolidate all the alerts and everything, and I'll like a SIM. And then, okay,
Hmm.
now I have everything in one place, but I can't make sense out of it because it's too much. There's so much noise. So we've gone to adding EDRs and XDRs and threat intelligence, and we're trying to use automatic tools to reduce a lot of that noise and tell them, this is what I want to focus on, or this is what I want to see. And we're seeing the same trend now with kind of the advance of cloud and software as it's exploding in the recent years. We're also seeing it from an attacker perspective, where attackers are looking and seeing, oh, there's so much beautiful code I can exploit on the cloud, and it's accessible to anyone. Oh, here's a secret. Let me connect to the S3 bucket and pull information. So it's super simple for an attacker in this case, because companies that have a lot of hardship in this sense now in the, I would say, AppSec space are trying to move towards that kind of SIEM direction where we're not able to prioritize well. So we're looking for the tools today that will help us to prioritize. What we're first of all understanding is we have multiple groups in the organization. So we need to work with business owners, developers, security, DevOps, cloud security, understanding our applications. And also, it's a good practice to talk with the legals. So we talked about compliance and how it speeds things up and requires you to stay compliant. Now, compliance is good. Compliance is also not as good because the fact that you can mark or check a control doesn't mean that it helps you. It just means that you have that control in place. If you don't know what to do with it and you don't have really good results, then we're not as secure as we might think. And we usually see that too late after we get breached or our tools detect something in runtime. And now I'm in a race. And it costs
Hmm.
more because this race cost me more because now I have to go back and fix everything. It's not broken. I have to fix it. And it costs more because if I'm not going to fix it first, someone attacker will breach me first. So let's see who wins.
The scariest kind of race.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at and along that same mindset as well, so a lot of what we've talked to some customers about as well in this space, so in SaaS discovery as well, what kinds of SaaS, where are my users putting data? We're also looking at, the the incorrect assumption that some of these are inherently secure, right? Oh, it's an API with me and the vendor. Oh, it's a SaaS application. It's secure, right? It's the vendor's job to make sure my data is okay. You're like, it's not, doesn't really work that way. So
Yeah.
kind of looking at that third party risk or that so SBOM is another part of that too. So SBOM being software bill of materials where
Yes.
especially AI tool sets all play a part of that. SaaS plays a part of that. Um, are there any suggestions that you all have, since this is the area that you all focus on too, that third party risk is huge? How can it really be controlled? Right.
Yeah, it's a very an interesting aspect because this is usually something that's hard for people who use software to think about. Okay, that software that I'm using can be vulnerable and can use to attack me. We've seen that, with SolarWinds and CodeCove and other types of different attacks that were recently became headlines. And the reason is that since software is extremely complicated, it's also very hard to detect that there is something wrong with my software, especially when I'm deploying that. So even if I'm looking at a company, of course, due diligence, understanding compliance and regulations and certifications, but overall, when I'm developing software, I want to know exactly what goes into my code. So all the APIs, the third-party SaaS, you'll see today AI connected to anything. Some developers, like, what happened in Disney, but some developer will say, okay, I'm just going to use a package or an LLM engine. I'm going to plug it in and start running. I really don't think about it from a security perspective. I'm thinking about how can I use AI to shorten the cycle and says, okay, the AI will do the job for me, but then I don't take the risk internally. And it bypasses a lot of controls in a lot of cases. And it usually is detected too late in the process after something happened to one of your customers, not to yourself, because this is their aim is to attack as many other customers of yourself than attack you because it's multiple targets. So eventually we can see that AI is really becoming more prevalent in our code bases, and we're going to see more and more open source, SaaS connected, a lot of cloud assets going around here and there. It's very, very hard. So when I'm looking at a strategy, the best thing is to stay focused. You can't secure everything. So just understand from talking to different people in your organization, what are the most important things for them? What are they doing to secure, if they're doing anything? And then start with, awareness, education, prioritize based on those elements, and then start expanding that and think about what a mature AppSec program will have and start building towards that. And of course, report it. It's really important.
Absolutely. And so part of these too, and we're introducing this idea to some of our customers who really aren't familiar with AppSec, DevSec tools, right? DevSecOps tools of, doing it, if you're not doing it at all, you might be doing it wrong, right? So doing something, baby stepping your way through, right? Getting to a point where you can mature your program to, be able to adopt different practices like that is going to move you in the right direction, but not doing anything at all is how you're doing it wrong, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And to move into our next one as well, so Boaz, thank you so much
Thank you.
for all of that great information, that trend information too. So fascinating stuff. Thank
you
you.
very much.
All right. Idan, welcome back.
Very much, Melanie.
All right. So data security, right? A lot of what we're focusing on is data security in general. And so one of a saying that I don't know where I got it from. It's certainly not my original one, but to have data is to have risk, right? And so the best we can do is understand maybe where our data is, who has access to it. But there's a lot of shadow AI, right? So we have some interesting information from you on kind of why it's so difficult, right? So we have organizations that have these kind of eye-opening moments when we're doing some additional initial discovery, right? Where are all of your SaaS products, right? What accounts do your users have platforms in, or what platforms do your users have accounts in? So it would be more of an exception than a rule if an organization somehow found themselves not adopting anything SaaS related, right? All of them have something of this in their organization. And so bringing any of those different accounts in is risk, right? Our data can go out through Gmail just as much as it can through a Salesforce, through any of these other kinds of applications. So do you all find that organizations have more of these eye-opening moments when just doing initial discovery? Or is it more the case that organizations maybe handle the knowns in use cases and unfortunately discover unknowns? Or do you find that that's kind of maybe lopsided in one way or the other?
So it's an excellent question. I think broadly within security and IT, whenever there's an asset that we would like to secure, and it's not trivial to stay on top of, which ones of these assets, which instances do I have with this? There's always a question of how do I discover this? And then how do I programmatically make sure that whatever security program I have deployed against this asset, I'm truly covering all my bases. And we see it in every part of security. And SaaS is no exception, right? It's the barrier for our end users to adopt a new application has become a sign-up form, essentially, right? It's the only thing stopping a user from consuming a new application. And also, as IT leaders, we're incentivized to allow our end users to choose the tools and solutions that they are most efficient with. And so if we're trying to secure these applications without hindering business from happening at the best pace that we can to offer to our businesses, then this is where we start seeing sort of that tug of war between unmanaged shadow versus how do I want to secure it. And I think it comes to your previous comment on safety versus velocity, right? I think from our experience, the just the amount of sprawl is definitely surprising to many organizations. Our own numbers show that only about 13% of the applications out there are actually managed by the IT organizations, with the rest of the applications being ones that the general populations, the end users themselves, that, as you said, are becoming very, very tech savvy, or just spinning up for themselves. And once you sort of turn on the light and you see this, there's definitely a shock moment of, okay, like this is a lot of applications that we didn't know about. But where we see the most value is actually on how do we then get from just discovery to actually getting these apps behind the security programs that they should be behind. Primarily everything around access controls, right? Get these apps behind SSO, behind MFA, make sure that you're managing user life cycles, and then also going deeper into each application and making sure that from a configuration management perspective, a posture management perspective, you're really tight on how do I make sure that these apps are as secure as I can. And if you're kind of choosing this approach of embracing the fact that the end users will adopt apps, not necessarily going through all the rigorous processes that we would have wanted them to go through, but if they do go through it, there's a way to allow them to do that while putting guardrails that don't introduce a lot of negative friction and stop business from happening. And that's sort of what we're trying to help through discovery and actionability around SaaS.
Awesome. So it's, as a user, like, sure, right, my organization has these apps they want me to use, but I've used another thing before in the past. It works really well for me. I'm just going to keep using that until they catch me, right? And that's a risk, right? So as a user, I'm like, oh, this is so great. I know how to do this better. And so when organizations, I think, have these unknowns, right? So we are of our knowns, right? We can protect those. We have plans around them. We have mitigation controls. We have backups, for example. We'll talk about backups and resiliency soon. But a lot of times users are like, oh, well, I Googled it and this other thing was a free account. And I love this is not my original quote. I can't remember who said this, but there's no such thing as free. So when they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to start this free account, it's fine. They have my email address. That's it. Like, no, they also have the rest of your information behind all of that, right? So shadow here, and for those of you unfamiliar with kind of the term or what we call shadow, are those unknowns, right? So people using applications and services, especially we don't have a lot of controls, downloading different software to their laptops that are connected to company systems. We can think about this in all the ways that we have connections, like mobile phones, and the very, very big need for mobile security and protecting those BYOD devices. So it sounds like you mentioned a lot of sprawl, right? There's applications everywhere. People are using them in different ways. For shadow AI in particular, right? So super hot topic. Everybody's talking about AI. We've talked before as well as it's a reality, right? There are 100% users in every organization using, so probably trying to use, that's not secured, using AI tools without the knowledge of IT, right? So IT being sometimes the reputation of no, right? Or security teams, no, you can't use this, no, you can't use that. This is what you're forced to use. So these applications with AI, especially generative AI, learning off of their data. So when we talked about Disney before, right? How he just wanted to innovate, right? There needs to be a balance between innovation, like you mentioned. So if I'm an organization that maybe I don't have controls on it yet, I know these tools exist. What are some of the questions organizations should be asking themselves as part of that strategy to start tackling this very real problem in their organization?
Yeah. Great question. I think primarily the first one is sort of what's your organizational strategy around AI adoption? And at least my take is shadow AI and shadow SaaS in general is inevitable, right? It's going to happen. It's sort of we're almost part of a revolution of an expectation of bring your own app, like we had with bring your own device, right? Like, why do I need two phones? And now it's why can't I use the tool that I'm most capable in? And just like you don't go to your mechanic and come in with your own toolbox, then as IT leaders, why do we expect our employees that are very well versed in tools from previous positions, et cetera, or they want to innovate and use the latest and greatest? If strategically we're allowing them to use that, then the threat model around AI and shadow AI then becomes, okay, what are my guardrails that I would like to put around shadow AI and AI usage in general? And they typically revolve around data security, privacy, lifecycle management, and access controls. And I think as long as an organization, we're taking a really hard look, introspecting ourselves, saying, what is the trade-off between what I'm allowing myself to, quote unquote, lose in any of these areas versus I'm losing the ability and how effective my end users are going to be. And we think that there's a really, really broad spectrum. It doesn't have to be all, let's block anything AI related, or we just can't do anything about it. Rather, there are a lot of ways to create low friction ways that essentially interact with your end users to better understand, better educate, and allow them to use AI securely, right? So if we work with the end users, we reach out to them, we educate them about the risks that they're introducing, our acceptable use policy, what is legitimate, what isn't, et cetera. I think we can get to a point where we allow users to use AI, but they, one, understand that there's a policy in place and we're modifying their behavior, but by them knowing that somebody's looking at this. But two, we're not stopping any business from happening. They can run and compete.
Excellent. So the IT leader, regardless, right? So if you don't have a specific AI person in your organization, you can still champion some of these efforts, right? You can still start with these conversations, start with these questions, and move into stepping that into your overall program as well.
Definitely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating information. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much. So we're going to roll into resiliency. So we are looking at backups and recovery and my continuing frustration sometimes about why we're still not talking about it. Like, why are we still not talking? So we know
Who's
how
not talking
important
about it?
applications are. I know. Mac is talking about it.
I've been talking about it for years.
I love it. And a part of that too is not just that we know, right, as IT professionals, we know we need backups. It's part of the curriculum, right? We know as a checkbox, part of compliance, we need backups. But the last thing that you need is to know, yeah, sure, it's a backup. This is like, everybody knows we need backups, but do they work? I think it's also part of it. I've been assisting customers with incident responses, for example, or recovery efforts from cyber incidents. You also have natural disasters, acts of nature that can impact us. The last thing you need is for you to use your backups and then realize they're not actually going to work. So validation is a very big part of resiliency. Do you have some more stories? I think we have maybe some metrics around this as well, for just why people don't do validated backups.
Yeah, It's funny. I started specifically around like backup and disaster recovery in 2011, and back then it was more convincing organizations to incorporate backups, and then shortly thereafter, it became getting that backup off site and kind of adopting the best practice of a 3-2-1. I'm sure that everyone's probably heard of by now, but having 3 copies of the data, 2 different types of media, one off site. But that kind of long-standing best practice within the last few years has evolved even into additional numbers. I like to call it the Bunnell principle because it's at the zip code level now, 32110. If anyone looks it up, that's Bunnell, Florida, and I'm the only one that calls it the Bunnell principle. But anyway, but the addition of that addition 1 and 0 is adding in an immutable characteristic that wasn't there before. Slightly addresses air gapping, and they kind of bundle them in that one, and then the 0 would be 0 errors. And in the reason why, and when you talk about validation, it's always been a best practice, right? You want to have the most recent version of clean data to recover from in the event of an outage. But when you compare, the tooling and the approach and what most organizations and staff have experience in it is the historical disaster recovery and backup, whether, it was focused and developed around fire, flood, natural disaster, maybe more likely human error. What's interesting now is that conversation's almost entirely shifted, and I think you may have mentioned it before, but it's either Gartner or Forrester, saying cyber resilience is the phrase or word of the year for 2025. We've actually adopted that a little bit earlier because we saw the groundswell all the way back to 2016. So global backup and disaster recovery service provider, we've got 6,000 customers all over the world. So we kind of have our own trend reporting in a sense that in 2016, we saw that cyber related phone call come in a little bit more often, right? So instead of, hey, I've, fat fingered this, I need to recover into your environment, or I got hit by a tornado, or, whatever the case may be, that I've been hit by ransomware or some other cyber related incident, and I need to fail over into your environment for that reason. 2018, it became to where, okay, we probably need to come up with something a little bit more formal around this, which kind of inspired our compromised data recovery framework that we leverage internally to help organizations recover. In 2020, that hockey sticked a little bit more. Moral of the story, 2024, we saw more of the cyber use case than any other cause of failover. So it's grown to the point of kind of forced productization on our side because the response from fire, flood, natural disaster and a cyber-related incident is very, very different. And that validation element becomes all that more important because your goal isn't necessarily how fast can I get my most recent version of data back up. It's how fast, in conjunction with incident responders, can I find the most recent version of clean data? So the more validated copies you have, the more chances you have of finding a more recent version of clean data to recover into, so you're not reinfecting yourself, if that makes sense. That was a super
Absolutely.
long-winded answer to maybe a short question, but
That was great. It's a great trend that y'all have seen, right? So this isn't like you just started doing it this year because resiliency is a hot topic. You've been doing it for years and years and have been able to, understand why, right?
yeah, we just adopted the marketing word 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone loves the marketing words.
Yeah.
One metric that stood out to me as well, when we were looking at resiliency, was it was estimated that fewer than 1 in 5 organizations back up their SaaS data, although 53% said that they've lost data because they couldn't back it up from SaaS applications, right? So 1 in 5. So we've been talking a lot about SaaS and Gen AI and kind of where our data is, but I wanted to make sure we talked about resiliency as part of this too, is that yes, right, those are very important operational things, but a lot of organizations don't understand that you have to back those up as well,
If you can.
if you can.
That's the key. So to my earlier point, the conversation really changed from disaster recovery to cyber recovery, and it's not like if you're familiar with the terms, disaster recovery as a service, it's not even cyber recovery as a service, but cyber incident recovery program. It really requires more in-depth digging and people and process and governance of a program, like how it's change management handled. I would say that our main goal going into any kind of customer engagement, and to be honest, a lot of that comes from some regulatory either change or cyber insurance requirements that are changing slash, hey, this is these premiums are negotiable. So if you can prove that you're less risky to me as an insurance company, then that has an impact on your premiums. So we see a lot of business just because of that. But it's not just, again, the tools and the targets. I kind of like to say that the backup and DR space was dominated for a long, long time of, okay, what software or backup product are you using and what target are you pointing it to? It's so much bigger up through the application and the planning and decision trees, and the testing quality.
Mm.
All of that becomes more important, and all that kind of parlays into third-party risk assessments. And you mentioned SaaS providers, which I would kind of put as a maybe like a sub point or sub assessment to evaluate the terms of service and what protections that SaaS provider is actually giving you. So I think a lot of organizations may view moving to a SaaS platform as a means to transfer risk in some scenarios. But if you read through the terms of service and EULA and all that, it becomes a little bit concerning because they have no liability if they lose your data, or maybe it's backed up, but it's sitting right next to, the production data, or maybe it's not outside of their environment. I mean, we get involved in a lot of cases with maybe it's a simple as S3 offload. Hey, we'll give you the ability to offload this to your own storage target, which gives you a little vendor diversity and eliminates some lock-in, and again gives you another copy that you have control of versus the service provider. But not all of them even allow you to do that. And what's funny, especially in the regulatory space, Microsoft itself historically hasn't done much to back up M365 data. They've launched some things that will allow you to do that, but that obviously continues to live in Azure. So from a governmental standpoint, or a lot of regulatory space, like the fact that if I can capture their backups in Azure and put them in a target, either in my environment or AWS, they feel a little bit better, and it checks a couple more boxes. So always interesting to read through those terms of service in the SaaS world for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And we talked a lot about balance today as well. So as technology leaders, right, you're not doing just one software in a silo. We're not doing just recovery in a silo. We're not doing just application development, just SaaS discovery, just those edge controls in a silo, right? These are all part of maybe cross-team efforts. Ideally, we're not doing them in silos, I should say. All part of business continuity planning. And so, I love compliance. I happen to really enjoy those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
so when organizations, I've talked to some organizations who don't have business continuity or business impact analysis, who don't necessarily understand that when that very, very bad day happens, we don't want that to be a resume generating event, right? We want to be able to have plans in place to, if we need to go offline and do things by pen and paper, do we need to, how can we do that? How long is it going to take? What's the cost to the company for being down, right? You're still working, you're still trying to recover and try to restore this data, right? Like you mentioned, what's the cleanest copy? So there's a lot of things that they're trying to balance and make sure that, this is already costing us millions of dollars. How do we get back up and running as fast as possible? And so with validation, I think one of the things I always try to drive for validation is having someone else help with that, right? Having a third party project manage that, validate with you, send you alarms whenever those backups aren't working correctly. There's a lot of monitoring, a lot of bits and pieces that you're moving around, but it's balancing between all of these different things and how each of these things that we talked about today are all connected.
Yeah, and finding some way to quantify that risk. And one other, I got some divergent thoughts going here, but you talk about having the actual plans and testing them. But even when you mentioned earlier, I guess the introduction to this whole segment is, what people aren't talking about. Think about the role of a disaster recovery coordinator. So inside of an environment whose responsibility is to own, and test these recovery plans, who is responsible to train staff in incident response. Again, you can address the decision trees, but the liaison between security, legal, IT executives during an event like that is something that we kind of add to the programmatic checkbox that a lot of organizations don't have. But the other one, when you look at, oh, I've got to add all this stuff, but cost justify, the importance, maybe the number one thing that you look at is how do we identify our vital data assets? So what data in our environment is actually worth wrapping extra layers of protection around? And then how are we prioritizing recovery of that specific data? In our experience, that really only accounts for about 20% of the overall data footprint in a customer's account or in an environment. So if you're going to spend some extra money, at least having that validation exercise, to identify those vital data assets could be not a cost savings, but help you not overspend unnecessarily, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So we're just running out of time. Thank you so much, Matt. A lot of really great information, a lot of us to think about and discuss more, because we need to be talking about resiliency more, for sure. All right. So Matt, thank you so much. And so I'm going to pull up the last slide here. This is the QR code for everyone's LinkedIn. So everyone here on the panel. So I'm going to leave this up instead of the Q&A slide so people have a chance to look at that. And then Eric, we have a couple minutes left. Do we have maybe what the top question from chat for our panelists today in the QA?
The chat were pretty much answered, but I have others based on, oh, something just came in. If employees use generative AI tools like ChatGPT, what data security policies should we implement to prevent leaks?
Ooh, I have lots of ideas. So what data policies we should use as we're starting to think about introducing Gen AI. All right, so this is not I can talk about this, but let's see. Boaz, Idan, Daniel, Mac. Anyone want to jump in on this one while we have a couple minutes left?
Yeah, so Idan, you want to take this one? Yeah, okay. So really from generative AIs like ChatGPT, from a data security policy, first of all, there was another question about the usage of third-party SaaS. This is something that's really important because there's so many AI tools out of ChatGPT that are very small, and sometimes they carry a lot more risk than just using ChatGPT. So really the first thing to do is to have an inventory, at least an assets of everything that you have. At least either from code or through discussions with the different departments or with IT if you can find it. And really the second part from a data security policy is understanding what are you going to approve and how are you going to do it. So just putting enforcement in place or detection in place, that's good, but eventually you want to educate people, you want to talk with the people, you want to ensure that they understand that if they now want to use an AI tool, so first of all, talk about it, ask about it, can I use that at least in that sense? So this is kind of the approach that I would take first, but Idan, I know that you have something to say about it.
I think I have a lot to say, but not in 30 seconds. That was a great response.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and for the great conversation, by the way, Melanie, excellent job, panelists, amazing content. But what I see a lot of challenges for leaders out there is they have competing agendas fighting for the budget, right? And so I just kind of want to see what kind of strategies you might have seen your clients kind of develop political currency and influence as they're kind of advocating for outcomes when other business units might be looking at the same thing, but looking at it from a different lens. So a lot of that's, kind of shifting maladaptive culture, maybe that have set in, like development, for example, developers, QA, IT have different KPIs, but they don't necessarily align, right? SaaS security culture is a culture of no, right? In the past, now it's a culture of no, KNOW is what I've heard on a couple of your webinars. Business continuity. Mac, you did an excellent job there. I know BIAs help with quantitative, qualitative developments that help people develop their RTO, RPO objectives. And then compliance, to you, Daniel, is really boards and decision makers and third-party risks is kind of driving solutions like yours as kind of the cost of doing business, but a lot of them are not regulated, right? But that's their third party, right? That they are. So kind of in the crux of all of that, what are the strategies you see people use to kind of help avoid some of those issues I just mentioned?
I could tell you a strategy that we've built around to help someone deal with that, if that is helpful.
Please.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the trickiest part is with any kind of risk assessment is that you're getting some kind of number code or red, yellow, green, and how does that translate into urgency for the various parties? We actually just recently, for this exact same reason, went to invested in some tooling and kind of formatted a workshop around ingesting, existing IT and security spend policies, procedures to assign dollar figures based off of cyber insurance payouts. So the numbers are meaningful from a source that matters based off exact events. And then that kind of helps an organization stack rank. Where are we weak? Where is that residual risk still out there, and what's worth addressing in what order? So at least they have a financial risk element they could take to the organization to compare against something else.
Love that. Yeah. So how dollars speak to boards, right? So how can we help dashboard? Right? How can we help prove the value of these tools, of these implementations? So not just in the scary doomsday scenarios, but in
Right.
the very real moving forward, future proofing ourselves
Mhm.
scenarios. So wonderful. Thank you all again so much, Max, Idan, Boaz, and Daniel had to jump. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time and all of your knowledge that you shared with us today. So we have a QR code up on the panel here as well. If you'd like to continue these conversations with someone here at Bridgepointe or any of our panelists, just reach out and let us know. I'll be more than happy to discuss these types of solutions with you and introducing those into your organizations. Thank you all so much. Have a fantastic rest of your week, everyone.